This is the original size of my cactus plant, and then this is the size after I baked it. You want to make sure that your images are enlarged because once you bake it, everything will shrink 3 or 4 times its original size. You also want to make sure that there aren't too many details in your image because once it shrinks, everything will look too crowded. Here I already have my image drawn on a piece of paper and I've lined the shrinky dink paper on top and I just traced everything. This image is supposed to be of me, and then the person on the left is my significant other, and I colored her hair black because we have black hair in real life. But typically, you want to make sure your color palettes aren't too dark because when everything shrinks, all the colors will be a few shades darker. You want to make sure that you use permanent markers. And if you don't have any permanent markers, you can also use paints, but it has to be acrylic paints. It can't be watercolor. And like I said, you want to make sure that you don't use colors that are too dark. This purple seems very light on camera, but once you bake it, it comes out to be a very dark shade. And when you're cutting your images, you can leave a space between the outline of the image, and the shrinky dink paper, because you won't be able to see it once you bake it anyway. You also want to make sure that you're very careful when cutting because the shrinky dink paper is pretty fragile. It will break if you bend it a certain way. Make sure you take your time when you're cutting these. Following the instructions that you can find in the manual that comes with the shrinky dink packaging, set your oven to 325 degrees Celsius. It should take about a minute for your pieces to finish shrinking. While it is shrinking, it will curl up. When it's curling, make sure it doesn't touch itself or other pieces, otherwise they'll stick to each other. I'm using a chopstick to make sure that it doesn't curl up in a weird way. If your piece shrinks and is not completely flat by the time it's finished, you can always take a spoon or some other utensil to flatten it. Another thing that you should take notice of is when you're placing your piece on the foil or the surface of whatever you're using, make sure that the side that you painted on or drew on is facing up so it's not touching the surface, because once you peel it off, the color will also come off of the piece. This is one of my pieces that curled up when it was in the oven. It curled into itself, so there was really no saving it because it was stuck to itself. And I have some reflections. This Gudetama, I painted it before I put it in the oven. So when you put it in the oven, it shrinks quite a bit, so all the paint clumped together and the texture came out really gross looking. This Gudetama, I baked it and then I painted it with acrylic paints and it looks much nicer, not as gross. The same thing happened to the strawberry. I painted it before I baked it and the texture is just really weird. This Courage the Cowardly Dog charm that I made, I painted before as well, but it doesn't look as bad, and I think it's because I had a much thinner layer of paint on it. So if you were to be using these shrinky dinks, I'd recommend using marker because these two cacti plants I use markers and they look much better than with the paint. But if you don't have markers, you can use paint as well. Just make sure you paint after you bake it. If you're wondering about whether or not to buy shrinky dinks, I hope this video will sway you to do so because shrinky dinks are so easy to use once you get the hang of it, and they also come out so cute.